Everything you wanted to know about harnessing digital media in your public relations strategy. This week on The Core of the Matter, brought to you by Core Comms. Welcome, I'm Adrian Smith, Managing Director at Core Comms. We deliver marketing and communications with passion, excellence and trust. We're not talking about simply posting content on Facebook or Instagram while you're at a press conference. We're talking about creating assets and opportunities that better connect businesses and brands to the outside world. Today on The Core of the Matter, we're talking to Core Comms Executive Chair, Nick Turner, and welcome back social media specialist, Trent Arnold. And they're going to talk about being smart with your digital PR strategy. They're also going to tell us a little bit about how a bit of money spent on organic content can deliver outstanding results for your client. Before we start off, it wouldn't be a discussion about PR without a good statistic. A UK survey of 300 leaders in business with more than 1,000 employees found about 1/3 did not understand the duties of their communications team, and even fewer saw the value. However, of those execs who did have a good understanding of comms, 80% thought it delivered good value. In other words, the greater the understanding of comms, the greater the perceived value. Now, is this true, or are the comms people just good at talking themselves up? There's a link to the study on our podcast page. Nick, you started your career in newspapers almost 30 years ago as a copy boy, and you've been with this business now for 23 years. What changes have you seen over time mixing in digital media with PR, going right back to the start?
Yeah, so as you say, I joined the local newspaper as a copy boy straight out of grade 12, and back in those days we had a copy room, it had a telex machine in it, had a couple of fax machines, and one of our jobs was to drive around the city picking up hard copy media releases from Parliament House and the Commonwealth offices and the Australian Stock Exchange. Clearly that's not what we do today. And when I joined corporate communications, I came from a media background. Media relations and writing for the newspaper was all I knew, and that's pretty much what Core Comms, or corporate communications as it was then, did. Over the years, there have been numerous other communication methods that have come into existence, social media being one of them, and a digital solution now cannot be ignored when you're talking to your various stakeholders, and it's got to be built into whatever you're doing.
Trent, you've got a degree in media from the University of Tasmania, and your studies focused on this very subject. What commonalities do traditional and digital public relations share in your view?
Yeah, so one of the keys of digital PR is collaboration. So it's sharing audiences, if that's social media audiences, if it's blog audiences, if it's podcast audiences. It's all about sort of collaborating with people so that you can kind of get yourself out there, get your message across in front of different audiences by leveraging those sort of strategic partnerships between people. So that's pretty similar to traditional PR. It's in terms of managing relationships, ensuring that you've got the right connections and that you do have the strategic partnerships in place. So that's where the two integrate, I think, really well.
And so we know the world of PR and influencing thought leadership and marketing, it's blurring in. So I just thought we should cover off on some definitions of what consists of public relations and how you can use digital to make them more effective. So we might start with you, Nick, in around community relations.
And that community relations is exactly as it sounds. It's about talking to a community that you want to interact with. And I think perhaps the best example would be a civil construction project. If you're going to be building a road through a particular community, you talk to that community about what you're proposing, you listen to what they have to say, you adjust your messaging, and then you roll it out again. And I think that both a traditional solution, which is a letterbox drop or a media release into the local paper, and a digital solution can work, because I do understand, and I'll let Trent talk about this, but I do understand you can really specifically target residents of a given street about work that's underway in that street.
Yeah. And what about social and digital in that space, Trent?
Yeah, so like Nick said, it's obviously really easy to ensure that you're putting your message or giving people the opportunity to give their feedback. So you can target postcodes, you can target people via interests or via associations with different community organisations. And then the thing where social media, I think, comes into its element is that as soon as you put a post out there, the comment section is there. Like, that's instantaneous feedback that you're then receiving, and you can alter your message like very quickly rather than sort of waiting for a list of responses or, you know, even surveys. Sometimes social media, at least that anecdotal feedback, maybe not hard data, but you can see what people are saying right off the bat, and it's a pretty quick feedback loop.
Yeah, so the concept doesn't change. The concept of information flow and exchange of information is the same, whether it's a traditional solution or a digital solution. The digital solution is just so much quicker. And like Trent says, you could be sitting around for days waiting for feedback from a street in which you're operating or building a road, but social is immediate, and you can adjust your messaging immediately.
And that mix of social in that, we're talking about not just organic, but we're also paid. So you can actually use the power of social media to target specific cohorts that you need to speak to.
Yeah, and I think especially with, say, a new project, you might create a Facebook page or a Facebook group, and you're going to have a very small number of followers, and a lot of them might not be in those targeted postcodes or targeted suburbs that you need. So with paid advertising, you can obviously chuck the suburbs in or the postcodes in and ensure that you're delivering that to people rather than sort of hoping that it'll happen, like hoping that they'll see the survey link on your website or hoping that they'll, you know, get the newspaper and see the article in there. You can actually ensure that you're sort of hitting them with a high amount of frequency, the right people, the right postcodes, and really make sure that you do get those responses quickly and control it as much as you can. Because
a big risk in these types of engagements is when people go, well, I didn't know this was happening and I feel like I've been ignored. And this is really giving you an insurance policy as a part of your comms to make sure that you are hitting everybody that you can.
Yeah, it avoids the potential for misinformation because you control the message.
And it's also why you use, I guess, a multi-channel approach because, not everyone has social media, not everyone reads the paper, not everyone watches TV, but you throw them all together and you ensure that everyone is being, I guess, exposed to your message or what you need them to be exposed to.
Yeah, it makes sense that if you're targeting a group of stakeholders that get their information from 6 different sources, give the same information across those 6 different sources and you've got a successful campaign.
And I guess when we're talking about data capture, utilising social media where you can have links to important information and your own digital portals, a lot of projects and organisations now use their own specific digital portal to run their engagement to capture data and be that source of truth. And so that just leveraging social media to get people there, drive people there is really important.
Yeah, it is. And obviously when you put a message out on the paper or on TV, you're sort of relying on people entering the search in, finding the right thing. Whereas with a social media campaign, in terms of generating responses, it's sort of one click and they're at the survey, they can fill it in. It does make it a little bit easier for the consumer at the other end to actually give their feedback that way.
Great. And look, we are going to get to talking about organic social media and brands dealing with issues around people teeing off about their brand and making complaints on social media, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. Want to talk about corporate and social responsibility, Nick?
Sure. So that's an easy definition about corporate and social responsibility is you've got an organisation that wants to invest in the community in which it operates in either a social or environmental context. Communicating about what it is doing in that context is really important, and I think a digital solution is probably the best option for that because you can specifically target who you need to be talking to, whether it's your employees or the community in which you operate, and that's something that the traditional media doesn't necessarily give you, because if you're only wanting to talk to 1,000 people, a story in the newspaper hits 50,000, you're wasting a lot of your effort. So honing your message in a digital way is the best way, in my view, to deal with a CSR type message.
And then content, Trent, that gives you a lot of flexibility as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And I think one of the benefits as well is that I mentioned it at the outset, but the brand partnerships, like sharing people's audiences. And one of the good things about corporate social responsibility in a digital space is that you don't always have to be out there promoting yourself because you're creating these partnerships, you're doing good things, and now these people that you're working with have their own channels to be able to push that message. So you do something good, and instead of having to be like, hey, look what we did, the brand that you're working with will be like, oh, thank you so much to these guys who donated this or gave their time to do this, which obviously looks a lot better when someone else is saying good things about you than it does when you say them about yourself. So that's one of the real big benefits of social media in terms of CSR.
There's nothing more valuable than third-party endorsement of an organisation, whether it's in that CSR space, particularly if they're doing good things in the environment or they're doing good things for their employees. Third-party endorsement is about the best thing you can have in a PR context.
Yeah, and it's old school, but it still works, and it works well for the digital realm. Nick, this is your speciality, is crisis management.
Yes. Crisis management or issues management, it's as it sounds. An issue or a crisis comes up, you absolutely do need to communicate. In a traditional context, we're talking about letters, media releases, making sure that the person who answers the phone has the right messaging, make sure that the call centre has the right messaging. That's that sort of traditional approach, and you have a checklist and you tick, tick, tick. But digital, again, gives you a great way to communicate those messages. It also allows you can put an unedited, so jumping back, if you send out a media release about an issue, you run the risk of it being taken out of context or misreported, not on purpose, obviously, but sometimes facts are distorted. In a digital context, you absolutely control the message, and that message is delivered to the right stakeholders. And so that's why it's just so important that, again, you take digital into account.
And in terms of crisis management as well, there's sort of a 24-hour news cycle now. People aren't waiting until the morning to read the paper to understand the news. There's sites on Facebook that are posting updates. If there's a car crash, it's on Facebook straight away. And the important thing about a crisis management response sometimes might be that you are the first person to lend your voice to that conversation, rather than waiting for someone else to do it, which might lead for misinformation to spread. You need to make sure that, like, if you're the official source, you're the first one out there to make sure that you can control the message and get the facts out there, so that there aren't people on Twitter or on Facebook that are misrepresenting what's actually happened in that context.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The traditional media that I talk about, they're on social media. They're using a digital solution to communicate. And the local press in particular, their Facebook presences are significant, and they do use those mediums as a way to communicate and perhaps drive people to buy a hard copy newspaper, but people are still getting their information from online, and they're getting it straight away. And that 24-hour news cycle is critical, and you've got to be a part of it.
Nick, tell us a little bit about employee relations in a public relations context.
Yeah, so I think that's just about communicating directly with your employees. Now, most organisations with which we work have mechanisms in place that they can talk to their employees directly. And a really simple thing that we do is, if we're saying something publicly, we ensure that the employees hear about it from us before they read about it in the paper. It's just comms 101, really. Even if it's just 10, 15 minutes before the statement goes out, and we've done even if we are working for a state-owned company or a government business enterprise, whereby you've got a minister making an announcement, which is often, there are different rules to that, and they like to keep those things close to their chest until they actually roll it out. But we still absolutely communicate directly with our employees, and it's through a digital solution. It's whether it's via social media, whether it's via and I'll get Trent to talk about those mechanisms, but we can communicate directly with employees via a digital solution just like that.
And like, workplaces do have digital solutions within them, whether it be email or other work-specific social media platforms to communicate.
Yeah, things like Microsoft Teams, I guess, would be one that's common here. I think Slack is another one. In America especially, it's really big. People have Slack channels, Slack teams that they discuss through. And those things are just same with all sort of digital solutions. It's just instantaneous. Like, it's called instant messaging, rather than sort of waiting or being able to get the whole team together for a meeting, or waiting until someone's available to talk to them face to face. You can send that instant message, and hopefully if they're online, they see it straight away.
And certainly lots of different applications. Video can be used. It can just be Word. It can be audio. There's no. It's how that type of organisation and workforce responds, because some large workforces, there's a lot of people in vehicles driving around all the time. They're hard to get to. So having these digital solutions and people having mobile devices means that they can actually be captured.
And a factor that needs to be taken into account is the talent of the message deliverer, because if you've got a CEO or a chairman who is good talent and can speak well, that's the way to do it. And you can, through a video content solution rather than the written word. And like you say, there are lots of people who are out on the job or out on the tools, and they're in a car or they're in a truck or whatever, and they don't want or have time to sit down and read a 16-paragraph statement about the latest news. They want to be able to get it immediately, and a video or a sound file is the way to go.
Probably one thing too, what Nick said about communicating to your staff or your employees and ensuring that they're across the messaging, where that comes into play is that they are then, brand advocates, or they're able to be people out there on social media because they have their own personal profiles and things like that. If they see some misinformation, they understand the context, they're actually able to clear it up on social media and be involved in that discussion and really help your brand in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because often, your best advocates are the people who work for you, and I know that we have clients whose employees get quite upset when we are not defending the organisation and them in the traditional media. But often that's about not wanting to keep the issue going. You want to kill the issue off and move on and worry about something else. So they get quite upset. But if you arm them with the knowledge, then they can advocate for you, both in the community around the barbecue or in the community when they're talking to their friends and who, they're critical about a particular thing that a company has done. But if they're armed with the knowledge, they can go, well, hang on, that's not right. The situation is X, Y, Z.
And we're talking about brand management, protecting the reputation of a brand. And, someone might walk into a milk bar to get or a coffee shop, and they've got the brand on their shirt. So they will want to feel empowered to defend it.
Yeah, so arming them with information to defend both themselves and the organisation for whom they work, that's critical. And again, that's just Comms 101.
Media relations, Nick, this obviously changed a lot over time.
Yes. So again, we right at the outset of the conversation, we talked about the fact that I joined a local newspaper as a copy boy, and times have changed so significantly, and media relations is still important, will always be important, and there are a lot of people out there, my father included, who get all of their information from the local newspaper. So I know full well if there's a story in the paper about a client for which I work, I'm going to get a phone call from him at some point during the day asking me about what's going on. So that's what there are people out there who only use traditional media like the newspapers or the evening news to get their news. So that's why it's important that we interact with them. And it is, but it's one solution. It's one way we communicate. So if Trent is rolling out comms in a digital context, off to the side or next to it we'll be doing traditional stuff, and it's a media release or a media conference or a media event. And
how important still in the traditional realm is an exclusive?
Oh, absolutely. So the media, regardless, so they're good and they're bad. So they're good. The media representative who's benefiting from the exclusive loves it, because then they can bang exclusive across the top of it. But you do tend to play catch up the next time you've got something for that particular client. So exclusives, I try to limit exclusives to when people ring, a reporter will ring me about something, and that's cool. We're happy to go with that. But exclusives generally don't work in the long run because you're playing catch up the next time around. And they've got long memories, reporters.
And I think so where a term like media relations has potentially evolved is that now you've got people that have blogs, say, or a podcast, industry podcast or industry blog. These people now, I guess, are the media. It's not the traditional media that we usually think of, but it's someone that has some sort of influence. They've got an audience, they've got a readership. So having relationships with those types of people as well actually becomes important, because instead of, like we said before, going on to the TV show, you might want to go on to the podcast, and like someone might want to come on this podcast, for example, and talk about their marketing and media. So those are things that have to be considered as well in terms of media relation now. It's not just the big companies, it's actually everyone out there that potentially has a voice or an audience.
It's blurring the lines of influencer and just from where they come.
Yeah, obviously when people say influencer, sometimes we consider that to be someone on Instagram that has 50,000 or 1 million followers, but there are B2B influencers, for example, that might talk about sales, or they might talk about marketing. they might talk about anything related to your industry. So those people have influence, they have followers. It's not an Instagram influencer, which is what most people are, I guess, familiar with. There are plenty of people out there with blogs and audiences that also carry influence in different spheres.
Yeah, and I think that in a traditional media way, there are certainly TV shows, radio shows, newspaper columns that are well read and do attract significant attention. So that you need to consider that. You need to consider that in the mix when you're talking about, you get a call from a reporter, that 1 million people read the column. You're absolutely going to be talking to that person because of the influence that they can exert over a particular issue.
That's really good going over those definitions. We might sort of step into your minds and talk about how you guys sort of assess the channels that you are going to utilise in any sort of public relations strategy or when you're trying to achieve some sort of an outcome for a client.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that I do is you look at who the stakeholders of the client are, and you determine how those stakeholders get their messaging. So if you know that the stakeholders are avid newspaper readers, or they will watch the ABC News at 7 o'clock of a weeknight, then you put those mechanisms into the mix. And that's a traditional approach. And I know Trent has a different approach in a digital context, but pick your stakeholders, pick how they get their message, and deliver it that way.
Yeah, so I think that's the key layer. Like, that process still needs to be adhered to, but the next layer I think that I would look at is in terms of, I guess from a maybe technical point of view, it's just in terms of cost effectiveness of different channels, or value for money or value for time even. So LinkedIn, for example, has better organic reach than Facebook. So spending time focusing on putting out press releases or news content on LinkedIn might be a better value for time than Facebook might be, as an example. But if you're running paid ads behind some of your press releases, then Facebook's going to be a more valuable use of your time. If you assume that the majority of the audience that's on Facebook is also on LinkedIn, and you look at the differences in cost in the two channels, then you might decide, okay, well, we think that LinkedIn's a better organic opportunity, but Facebook's a better opportunity to promote our paid PR releases. So that's another area of where you look at it. And even in terms of strategic partnerships, if you're going to collaborate with someone on a podcast or on a video series, you might say, oh, this person has 500 followers and this other person has 30,000 followers. So from that point of view, in terms of sharing audiences, you're not just looking at where your shareholders are, you're also looking at where the best value for money opportunities or best value for time opportunities are as well.
Yeah, and I think regardless, it just what Trent's just talked about there just demonstrates the importance of an integrated approach. You can't just use one method of communication to deliver your message. You need to look at it across the board and integrate what you do. So, but these are the sort of the conversations that we have internally all the time. And when we've got a client comes to us with an issue, we do talk about what's the best way to communicate on its behalf, and that's where whether it's a traditional solution or a digital solution or a combination of both, and more it's the latter.
And that approach really comes down to a lot around what that thing is. Are you dealing with a crisis where something needs to be done now, or are you building the profile of a CEO of an organisation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So so if you are building the profile, it's a slowly, and it might be the first thing you do is an announcement about the appointment, an opinion piece in the paper, and then you start to nuance the messaging via a digital solution. So I think that, but again, it's horses for courses, and you've got to look at it case by case. But ultimately, I can't think of any recent examples where we haven't applied all of the communication solutions to the issue.
Yeah, so I guess you put together a press release or some sort of opinion piece from the CEO of a company that's obviously pitched to the media, get it put in the papers. But then obviously you've got your own media as well, which are your channels. So you're pushing it out on socials, on LinkedIn, Facebook, and then you're running some paid ads behind it as well. So you're not just relying on one channel to be effective. We're not just relying on people to read the paper. We're also making sure that we've got people on social media that are being pushed the message and being able to communicate, being able to consume it there as well.
Terrific. So, Trent, I just want you to discuss with us the pros and cons of owned versus paid media. That is, controlling the message with your own blog, podcast, social posts versus the benefits of going through traditional media or other people's channels?
Yeah, so I guess it's the difference between starting your own podcast and trying to get on a radio show every morning or whatever it is, or writing your own blog pieces and posting on socials as opposed to pitching stories to journalists. And like we said, an approach that takes both into account and tries to achieve both is great. But sometimes, if your stories aren't being picked up, it's good to focus on your own channels, create the blog, I guess take responsibility into your own hands in terms of posting it, getting as much exposure as you can, putting some money behind it, as we mentioned before, to ensure that as many people as possible are seeing it. And instead of, relying on those gatekeepers where sometimes the message itself might be crafted differently than you interpreted, because obviously the journalist wants to put their own fingerprints on the piece. They might want a balanced view, whereas when you control your own media, your own website, your own blog articles, all those kinds of things, that's generally pushed out to the public as you intend it, completely as you intend it.
I think that's a really important point, that you're never going to issue a media release on behalf of a client in a traditional media context and expect it to be run verbatim. They're always going to balance it up with, it might be a criticism, a different view, a different commentator. So in a 40 centimetre news story in the paper, you're only going to get 20 centimetres at best. In the solution that Trent's just talked about, you control it, you've got all of it. If it's a 40 centimetre or a 500 word story, it's your message, it's your point. There's no one commenting on it or diluting the message, and I think that's critical.
And you, I guess, when advising clients, look, you have that in mind when you go down that media pathway, the more traditional pathway. And welcome, or it's important that third party gets to have a kick or gets to put their point of view across.
You absolutely need to understand the moment you press the send button on the email for a media release, you lose control of the message. And I think that's probably the most significant thing that someone out there in client world thinking about communicating needs to understand, because I've had conversations with clients after we've issued a media release where we've had 2 or 3 paragraphs picked up out of a 12-paragraph statement. They didn't run it. They didn't run all of what we said. But in the digital solution is just so much easier, because you're in control of it. They'll run it. You're in control. You run it all.
And I guess getting across from the client and we still have these conversations now where you put the media release and they go, "Oh, it didn't get run." Their expectations are you send it out, it gets run.
Yeah, so you've just got to do that. You've got to treat every issue like it's a new issue, and be really candid about what the risks are, because there are. What we try to do though, before it gets to that point, we will, if a client comes to us with an idea about a media release or a media opportunity and it's no good because there's no news value in it, we will tell them that. And often that advice is ignored because they just want to get it out there, and that's fine. But as long as we're upfront and transparent and honest about that, then I think that's a good thing.
But there's that opportunity, if they want to get that message out, there's those other channels available to them.
I do want to say that, just not to neglect the benefits of the earned media, there is, like we talked about at the outset, a halo effect as such from other people talking about you. So when your story is run in a newspaper, there is an element of, I guess, don't even know how to explain it, it's authority, or that halo effect from having it being picked up by the news. And even in terms of being on someone else's podcast, or having someone give you the time of day to be on their podcast or to be on their blog, guest blog, whatever it is, there is that halo effect of someone else giving you their tick of approval, as opposed to obviously pushing out your own message, which is great because you can control it as much as possible, but you do lose, I guess, that little bit of sheen from the halo effect from other brands talking about you.
Yeah, so I think you've got to take that all into account. That's just all part of that integrated campaign approach, and you need to have those conversations. And so oftentimes the benefits of the halo effect may be outweighed by the criticism that you may attract because of the nature of the interview. But you just got to make those decisions case by case. See, it's not a blanket approach will not work, and it does not work, and that's why we treat things on a case by case basis.
And it does move quickly, doesn't it?
Yes.
Somebody comes out with a comment and all of a sudden the story's progressed, and we have to change tack.
Yeah, so back in the day, back when I first started at Core Comms or Corporate Communications, we'd have you'd be working towards the end of the day, like between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. That's when you'd be providing your comments back to the reporters because that's when they were writing their stories. Nowadays, because of the 24-hour news cycle that Trent referenced earlier, you've got to respond straight away. Reporters now are typing their stories into the layout of a paper and pressing upload, and it's online. And so, you don't want XYZ was contacted for comment. You want to have the comment in there. And that's why you need to respond quickly. So things have changed.
So we touched on it a little bit earlier, and it's a question that we get asked a lot. We have a lot of people come to us and asking us for our advice around when people are commenting negatively on your brand's Facebook page or your business's Instagram. How do you assess that and approach it, Nick?
Yeah, so I think that I always say that corporate affairs is sometimes about doing nothing and knowing when to do nothing. Social media doesn't give us that luxury, although there are still some rules that you can apply to social media when you're responding to criticism. I think it is important if something is wrong that it's corrected, and that's really important. And I think there are ways to do that. But I do think that responding quickly on social media is important. Traditional media, similarly, you need to be quick so you don't lose control of the debate. But social media, particularly Facebook, can spiral out of control in a hurry, and you just need to make those decisions really quickly.
Yeah, and there are a few sort of rules of thumb that I don't mind in terms of deleting comments, and that generally comes down to when people aren't being, I guess, genuine. They're not being, like, they're swearing or being completely antagonising, those sorts of things. I think people will understand deleting those comments, but if it's something that is fair criticism or looks like fair criticism, if it's incorrect, obviously clarify that and clear it up. But if it's criticism as well, I think the important thing to consider is that the response on social media isn't always to the person that's posted the comment, it's to the 100 or 1,000 people that are actually reading it. So you need to make sure that you're clearing up the message for the other people that read it. And even if it is a fair piece of criticism, the way you respond in terms of, like, we're really sorry to hear about that, how can we make it better? Like, the way that you react to that comment actually shows what you're about to other people as well. So it's really important to do that.
Yeah, and I think that deleting comments has risk. And that's why you apply some fairly specific rules around, like, if it's offensive or if someone's swearing, then, you can delete that, and everyone, I think, understands that. But if it's just if someone is wrong and it needs to be corrected, and they're doing it in a respectful way, I don't see the need to delete that sort of comment. And like Trent says, I think that's the most important thing. You're not really answering the question of the person who's written the post. It's everyone else who responds afterwards, who then gets that context and understands where we're coming from and adjusts their thinking so that it does control, I think, and we've seen examples of this, it does control the messaging going forward.
Yeah, and I think the issue is if someone does leave some piece of criticism or a comment that's negative, and maybe it's there for an hour, it's there for 5 hours, and a lot of people probably read it. If you decide that it's wrong, so you decide to delete it, everyone else who has seen that comment will assume that you're hiding it, that you've got something that you're trying to cover up. They won't assume, oh, they deleted it because it's wrong. They'll assume they were correct. So that's why responding and clarifying the issue is actually a lot better approach than deleting something that is incorrect.
And sometimes the decision about responding will be taken based on whether there's any traction, if the statement that's inaccurate, offensive, whatever, if it's getting any traction. And if it's not, sometimes it's best just to do nothing. And that's where that corporate affairs-y knowledge comes in. But it's often you often do need to respond quickly. Not often, you do need to respond quickly in a social context.
I was going to ask around that, because certainly we apply that when we're talking about in the traditional media, but there's just a lot of noise on social media. Lots of people are teeing off on Twitter or Facebook about someone or something, and a lot of people and brands just let it go. I guess that's an assessment you make at the time.
Yeah, often. So we will often take calls from clients who go, "Have you seen the XYZ website of a newspaper? Have you seen the 50 comments on the Facebook page about the story?" And often take those as seriously as you would if they were commenting directly on your own Facebook page or your own Twitter feed, or pick whatever social media example you want. Those things do get wildly out of control, and if you are an avid follower of the news media like I am, you see the same names popping up all the time. So I think that's an important bit of context.
I think one good thing about social media as well is that you do get a sense of your own brand advocates in that way. So when people leave negative comments on news posts, if a brand has a strong following or a strong social media engagement, a lot of the time their advocates will step in and actually clear up that miscommunication for them. And that's like when you see a brand that really has, I guess, their community established and they've got their own social media guidelines set up really well, and the community is sort of really strong advocates for them. You see that in effect without the brand having to step in and clear it up. They've got those people who will do it for them, which is great.
Great. Now, speaking of brands, I just want to get some of your thoughts on brands out there that you see are doing a good job. I know that the brands that have a lot of budget and can spend time on content and reaching out to their audiences are the ones that people like banks, car brands, and sporting organisations. It's really important for them to be staying engaged. So I just wanted to. I know that you guys are both sport nuts, and I just wanted to get some thoughts so people can jump on and have a bit of a look around at what these guys do. Nick, being a very passionate North Melbourne supporter, what is it that you notice that your team do? What do you like? What do you think works well?
Yeah, so North Melbourne, the AFL is really, really good at communicating all things to everybody, and they use a variety of different platforms to do that. North Melbourne Football Club, there are regular emails that drive us supporters to the website, where there are interviews with the coach, pre-game and post-game. And there are interviews with players. On the website, they also put media interviews from the big radio stations in Victoria, for example. They're communicating directly with us in an unedited way, and I love it. Even when North Melbourne loses, and that's happened a lot over the past year, I still want to see what Rhys Shaw has to say about the performance and who he thought played well, who needs to work. And I think even when North Melbourne has recently delisted 11 people, we got an email about that, and we got a little photo of all of the people who'd been delisted and some comments from all of them about what North Melbourne means to them. And it's just proactive. And it works for me. And I'm clearly biased, but I do want to know as much as I can about North Melbourne.
So they've created that within you through those communications. So you're stuck to that brand, and you will dive in to protect that brand if.
Absolutely. So there are a number of Facebook pages that I'm a member of, and which are reasonably vocal in their criticism of North Melbourne, and I am always defending. I just refuse to have anyone criticise the North Melbourne Football Club, despite our current performance.
So here you are as a extremely experienced public relations practitioner, and it works on you as well.
Indeed, but I don't know that I would be able to work for North Melbourne because I'd be blinded by my own loyalty, and even when they needed a clip, I wouldn't be able to do it.
So Trent, you're a big basketball fan. You love all sports, but the NBA are particularly good at this stuff, aren't they?
They are really good at this stuff, like just small things as well. Like they were one of the first brands that jumped on TikTok, for example. So just like one of those quick things of adopting social media channels really quick, which is they're always really huge for. And as well, a lot of the things they do, I think that are really good, even in terms of corporate social responsibility. So they have this thing called NBA Cares, which is like the teams go into the community, and it's always promoted on NBA League Pass. So they don't have ad breaks because it's sort of a paid subscription service, but what they do show during those stoppages is the NBA Cares commercial. So sort of promoting the good that they're doing in the community. It's a really big thing that they do. And as well, they use the same sort of content for social media. So when they go out in the community, all of the players, they're really good on their socials. The teams are really good on their socials, and they foster relationships that way. And, when you're go out to, say, Portland, Damian Lillard goes out there to a barbecue. The team posts about it. Imagine all the comment sections from the people that were with him at the barbecue. Like, they're all just talking about what a nice guy he is, all those kinds of things. So they give the community the opportunity to respond and lend their voice to the conversation, which is really important and really, really beneficial, I think.
And the fact that, maybe it's rules, maybe it's franchise agreements, maybe it's because they believe in what the NBA is doing. But the teams and the players, they do step into line by and large.
Yeah, they do. And I think, NBA Cares is a thing in terms of sending people out into the community. Like, a lot of these guys are young kids sometimes that go to a new state, a new area. They don't potentially have those ties to the community, but by, I guess, making it part of their contract, I think it makes them more involved in the community by having that be something that they have to do, or like as part of their contract. But then by the end of it, they sort of become really connected with the people that they meet, and it actually, like, it feeds into the development of, like, the community ties and the way that the players themselves feel about the communities. Like, I know a lot of players will speak really fondly of the people they meet and the communities that they're engaged with. And when they leave, if they go somewhere else or if their career's over and they live in a different state, a lot of the time they will continue to donate back to the community that they were first with when they originally joined the NBA.
Yeah, I think that because the NBA, these guys are superstars. So and I follow the Boston Celtics, so if you're in a Boston school and Kemba Walker walks in and you're a 10-year-old child, you must be beside yourself. I think I'd get a bit starstruck. And I get starstruck with North Melbourne players. So these multi-million, they're superstars of their sport over there in the States.
And they've got a lot of resources behind them, a lot of strategy, a lot of people working behind the scenes to make sure that those things are covered off and it cascades through the organisation.
I think that's actually a really good point. So even though NBA Cares works, there's a lot of resourcing that goes into it to make sure that it does work. And, that's that CSR solution that Trent was talking about. And so that doesn't happen by accident. And there are a lot of people out there who may think that it does, but there are people like us who work for the NBA and for the individual franchises about getting their messaging out, and they do it really well.
So one of the really simple things too that the NBA does, or I think American big brands in general do this quite well on Twitter, is we talk a lot of the time about humanising the brand, using social media, engaging with people, having a bit of fun with it. That's one of the things that social media is really good for. So brands like, say, the Sacramento Kings, the Lakers, they'll post some like really funny and engaging tweets that will sort of have everyone talking about how good the social media team is. And like, obviously they're at a bigger scale, but a lot of brands down here can have a little bit of fun with their social media, make a joke, have something that'll get people laughing, and that's just a way to humanise your brand and have people, I guess, have that more personal connection with you and what you do.
That's great. Look, we've covered a lot of ground today. I just want to talk to you both about, what are the top two takeaways that you've gotten from the conversation, or that you just want to make sure is imparted to the listener. There's PR and comms people around the place listening to this. Nick, what's your two takeaways for today?
I think you just got to be consider an integrated campaign. You just can't do one thing and expect it to work, and it's got to be over a sustained period of time. I think that, gone are the days where you can just bang out a meter race and your job is done. You've got to apply the same messaging across all of the platforms that are available to you to get your message across. And you've just got to do it. If you're going to be a serious player in a communication context, and you get back to that quote at the outset of the podcast, communications is taken seriously by, the chairman or the CEO of the organisation, and they are committed to it. And I think that's just the most important thing for me is integrated, multi-channel, single message communication, and that's what works, and it's demonstrated that it does.
Trent, your takeaways?
Yeah, I think you probably can't look past that integrated approach. It's even different in this context than it is, say, in advertising, because you've got the differences between owned and earned media that we discussed. So you've got the benefits of owned media where you can control your message, and then you've got the benefits of the earned media where you get a halo effect. So in this instance, the owned media has benefits that earned media doesn't, and earned media has benefits that owned media doesn't. So to get all of the benefits that are sort of at your disposal, you need to make sure that you do have an integrated approach that uses all of those different opportunities. So I think that's probably the most important takeaway. And I think the other takeaway is probably just all of the key principles that underpin like both the traditional and the social media or the digital approaches. They do remain consistent. Like, it becomes about relationships, it comes about strategic partnerships, it becomes about all those kinds of things. So you need to ensure that you've got a firm strategic base behind all of your comms principles that are applied across all of the channels that you can apply them across.
Yeah, that's really important. So even though the communication methods that we employ have evolved and changed, our approach has not. We are honest and transparent and open in our communication, and we have been from day one, and that will continue and has continued regardless of the communication channel that you employ. So that's that's probably the most important thing from my perspective, is that the messaging doesn't change, the approach doesn't change, but it's the delivery that does, because it can be more effective.
Terrific. Good conversation, guys. Really appreciate you guys coming onto the core of the matter and having a chat about all of that. Lots and lots of takeaways for people to put into their own strategies and have conversations in their businesses, and have those conversations with their CEOs or their managers to raise that knowledge of comms and how important it is and how beneficial it can be for your brand. So that's Core Comms Executive Chair Nick Turner and Digital Media Specialist Trent Arnold. Jump onto our Core of the Matter page at corecoms.com.au/podcast for links used in the making of this podcast. The Core of the Matter is produced by Core Comms, based in Hobart, Tasmania. Join us on social media, leave us some feedback, and tell us what you'd like to cover in our next podcast. I'm Adrian Smith. Until next time, harness your passion and be a nice human.